Absolutely, no doubt. So, as we talked about at the top, obviously, you spent your entire career with the Rangers. This organization, New York City, just playing in Madison Square Garden. What was it about it that made you say, you know what, I don't want to play anywhere else. This is where I want to play my whole career.
Well, throughout my career, I had an opportunity, to become a free agent and sign elsewhere, but it was never an option. I always felt like New York was my home. The organization was so good to me. The city, I love New York City, and um, I just enjoyed every minute of my career as a Ranger. Um, and then, towards the end, I had an opportunity to sign with Washington, but it was not meant to be. I instead had to go in for open heart surgery, and it was another sign that I was only meant to play for one organization. But back to gratitude, and then you think of all the opportunity and support you received from the Rangers organization. That's something I often think about.
What makes playing at the Garden different than any other arena in the NHL?
I mean, the building itself is just so unique. The history, everything that goes on in there, and I experienced that more now than ever before because I'm there at concerts and both Rangers and Knicks games, and there's so much going on in there, and you can feel the energy in there. The location of it, I think, is unique in the middle of New York City. Um, so I think there's definitely a couple things that makes that arena so special.
Could you ever have envisioned that your number 30 would be hanging up in the rafters there just as a kid growing up in Sweden?
No, no, absolutely not. But it's definitely a cool feeling to walk in there, and it brings you back. When you see it, it's like you start thinking about the different teams you played for, teammates, games. Um, you run into staff that you've been running into for the past 18 years, and yeah, it really feels like home.
Absolutely. So you talk about being at home, right? And then your rookie season going all the way back to 05, 06 when you made that first game, that debut at Madison Square Garden. Just kind of take me back to that moment with all the fans in the crowd and you're standing there on the ices. What were you kind of feeling in that moment, your first game at Madison Square Garden?
Nervous, excited. You worked hard and for a long time to reach that opportunity. Um, so I think the biggest thing back then was just try to calm down and make sure your mind was in the right place. But it's a cool feeling, when you reach something that you've been dreaming about for a long time, and you kind of realizing that you're living your dream. You've been working towards that for such a long time, and then it happens, and then you just want more. Okay, it's one thing to you know get the opportunity, and then to follow that, it's you got to stay in the league and make an impact and make a difference.
And you had all this instant success and they started calling you King Henrik. How did you feel about the nickname when you first heard it?
I started laughing. I heard it a couple times on the street, New York City, and I definitely thought it would go away, but it didn't. So it was one of those things you just have to um, kind of, you can't take yourself too seriously. So you laugh a little bit, and obviously it's a nickname that's very hard to live up to. I feel like. But if my name wasn't Henrik, I think it would have been different. It's an old royal name. So that's at least that's my guess why Larry Brooks at the New York Post used it.
What's the craziest thing anyone's ever said to you kind of walking around the streets of the city? Like what's the craziest fan interaction you ever had?
Craziest. I don't know. I
Or
can
maybe
say that
funniest,
like
whatever you think is the
funny.
most fitting
No,
there.
but you know what? A typical interaction in New York City, I can be walking my girls to school or driving somewhere with the window down, and New Yorkers, they might see you, they acknowledge, they yell something, extremely loud, and then they move on. It's like they don't really have time for you, but they just want to acknowledge you, and I think that's so cool. It's a great place to, you know, to be an athlete in New York City. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure, and it's a big stage, but at the same time, you can live a pretty normal life. And but I love the fact that New Yorkers are pretty, they're busy. They
Always
might
something
yell
going on.
something. Yeah, exactly. They're going somewhere all the time, and I love that, the fact that they acknowledge and then they move on.
You kind of touched on it there, but I was going to ask, there's winning and then there's winning in New York. What's the difference there?
Well, having success here, like, especially when you reach playoff time, that you can just feel the city gets more interest. There's so much going on here in different sports too, so many different teams, but every time you go on a run, you can feel the city, support. It's coming, and more people are talking about it, and then you see more people watching the games at bars, and just that energy is pretty cool. Yeah, and of course, playing in Canada, where hockey is extremely
Yep,
big, I think it might be even more intense. But that's why I love the city, because you can feel that intensity, but at the same time, escape it a little bit.
for sure. Curious about